Okay, today we're going to talk about EMS system communications. So basically what we're going to do is just go over kind of on a national standard of what type of systems we're dealing out there with communications. Hopefully most of you are very familiar with this already, but this is just going to be a general review. Unfortunately, there are certain questions on National Registry that do come out on this, so just kind of want to go over that and kind of hit and talk about those issues. So basically, there's different type of communications we're getting out there. The person-to-person, where we're doing a face-to-face. We will be talking on telephone, and we'll talk about that, where a lot of times you have to call into medical control and different things on scene. We'll talk about voice over the radio and different types of dialogue we've done in the past, and then what we're really doing now, and kind of really just go through all the steps and process there. So basically, we're talking several different ways, whether we're talking to dispatch, whether we're talking to family, bystanders, the patient themselves, or other agencies that we're working with in general, and what we're going to do. There's also going to be the communication that we're going to have to be doing from both if we're going to physician's office or urgent care facilities, nursing homes, as well as the communication we're going to have in the hospital itself. And then it's basically, they're going to kind of going over the national aspects of when we used to do special codes. We used to have 10 codes here anymore that we don't do. Realistically, everything we're trying to do now is going to be on simplest basis of communication so everyone understands. And when we're talking about that, again, there's still codes that they'll use, the police departments will use, that are encoded to basically keep certain things private, and we do have a couple of those, like our code 99s and such. But generally, we want our communication to be pretty easily understood without having to do any special coded messages, things like that, which we used to actually do. This is pretty much straightforward here. I don't think I should have to touch onto this, but basically our big thing is we want to use plain English and make sure our communication in simplest forms. And then based on when we are reporting or calling into the hospitals and that, kind of the things that we will be doing is what is the patient's priority? This is code 1 traffic. This is code 3 traffic. This is no code traffic, however you want to say it. Basically, communicating the hospital of the level of priority you have with that patient coming in. And then basically relaying the information that you need to do, hitting the topics, and we'll talk about our patch reports when we're doing that, to what you want to relay, a quick, easy format that gets to them, and then how you can relay that information quick and easy to the staff. A lot of times, too, when we have to do that, and we're when we're communicating that information over there, it's who we are, what was the scene, what was our patient, what was their complaint, and then briefly, what have we done? What's the pertinent past medical history of what we've done when we're communicating that over. More so, we'll do a sample history on that as well when we're passing those findings out, and we'll talk about that also when we're doing reports, giving an exam what treatments we've done, and when we're going to show up to the hospital. And then when we talk about other pertinent information that they're going to ask for, the big thing I always relay there is, do you have any questions? Because it's very easy to leave some things out in your patch reports. You'll forget to say some pertinent information, so any questions, so you can fill that in. But we want to be a clear, concise, quick patch report out there. We don't want to be talking for hours and hours, which if you listen to patch reports out there, you'll hear some of them are very long. Some of them are actually just too short and doesn't give enough information. Again, we want to be very clear when we're coming in. Make sure you're listening to the channel, especially for those of you familiar with the HEAR system, waiting so you're not just transmitting and you walk over someone else that's going, and being clear, concise, so they understand what you're saying. Speaking in a normal pitch of voice, and that's anytime you're over the radio. And you'll see our new systems with the 800 megahertz will actually only allow you to talk so much time anyway, so you're not wasting your time. It'll shut you off. And of course, as with anything, we want to make sure that we don't have anything that releases something about the patient and being HIPAA compliance. Using general information across talking to dispatch, and making sure that you understand that and getting clear and concise readbacks so that each party understands clearly what the message was that you were trying to do. The next aspect will be in your PCRs that we'll be doing, and we'll be doing multiple of these of going over what we're doing. How you get this so you've got your times, reporting this down, because realistically when you're doing a PCR, you're doing it for an attorney is who you're writing it for. So you want to be clear, concise, and we're going to talk really a lot of detail on this when you do your report of what we're expecting, how to relay information, what not to put down when you're doing in there, and being as a complete a report as possible. And we've got some really complicated aspects of how we report things, especially when we're dealing with those patients who may be altered mental status, and how we relay that and what we put that down, because again, you're doing the reports technically for the attorneys and for a jury, and how you put the information down can be brought against you, and we'll talk again really in depth on that of how you report things. And then making sure everything's legible. Again, most of our reports now are done through the computer, so it's typed out. But going back through that information, if you don't have spell check through your report writing system, I like to write my reports out on Microsoft Word, because when I'm typing really fast, I misspell words and things like that too. So at least it's something to catch you, and make sure you reread your report and that you actually documented what you read is kind of what you were thinking. There are some acronyms that are acceptable and some abbreviations that are acceptable, but try not to use abbreviations out there because they can be misconstrued to a lot of different things. So within normal limits is one, WNL. It's one I really don't like out there. So we'll talk more about this in another format, but it's finding out what we can use. Here's some common radio terminology that's basically out there that you can use over there to do quicker on there. But a lot of the times you can just stay clear English, simple format is what we're looking for out there, not the 10-4 codes like you see there, 10-4, 10-1, 10-9. There's a lot of those 10 codes out there that we used to use. So plain English is going to be the quickest thing. And then again, it's talking in a clear voice, calm voice. If you listen to someone who's giving their initial size-up report or initial on scene, and they're very calm, it keeps you calm. When they get excited, it kind of tends to let the scene go up. And we'll talk about that more with scene control as well. And then the process of how you were notified. There's multiple different ones. We're pretty much just going through 911 calls is going to be our most aspect. But we also have where patients will come right into a station and do walk-ins. So a lot of different things of where we get and where that information came from. The other aspect that is hard, and I've come across this too, is when the actual caller is a third base caller who's on the route to the place and gives us an address, and it's actually wrong. I've had that where I was given an address that was a south address, and it was technically supposed to be an east address, so we go to the wrong place because it's not coming from the person who needs help, but it's coming from a third party. So a lot of different things there that can also be different. Other aspect now is wireless. Most people do not have a home phone, but they have a wireless phone. And if they don't know where they're at, the GPS doesn't bring it up like they did with the home phones. They're starting to get those areas, but it can be difficult, especially for myself. I live in Stevens County, but my cell phone registers to the Spokane County. So different aspects there that is more on a communication standpoint if you're in dispatch in that. But it is trying to find out exactly where you're going and notifying that as well. Also, there's a lot of vehicles that have the advanced notification responses in the car, and I apologize, my brain farting at this point in time, I can't think of the actual GPS system that I'm thinking, and you guys are probably all know from there, that's inside the cars that will notify dispatch for someone that the vehicle has been in a wreck. So those are out there as well. Lots of different ways that it gets to dispatch, and then from them they're going to, based on key phrases and things, dispatch us out. as we all know, I've been dispatched to a Bravo call that probably should have been a Delta call and turns into an Echo call, same as I've been dispatched to Delta calls that really are Bravo calls or maybe Alpha calls. But based on how words and how you state things to dispatch, they're going to elevate that level of call of where it needs to be. They're also going to be the ones giving you the short report. And based on that information, you're going to kind of be deciding of what you're going to and formulating what you're expecting to be on there. But again, multiple times I've been given a short report and it's something completely different when I get there. And I'm sure you guys have experienced that as well. This is something that should be utilized quite a bit. If you're on certain calls and you think you need to do something outside the specs or you want area aspect, is calling the hospitals, letting them know, not only to check to see, well, is this going to be a cardiac and I need to call in an activation, or is this septic? And if there's a lot of those cases where you're susceptible that you think it is going to be this, but you're not sure, you can always call and get that. Or if you think something needs to be done that's outside your scope, you can always call in and ask, hey, can I do this, or give an advice, to be able to do some other things. And then when we're transferring that care, whether it's going to be to a nurse or physician, depending on who's in the hospital, and you get that handoff, it's giving them all the information and knowing that. So if you're a transporting agency and fire is passing off to you, you've got to ask all those questions possible so you can pass on to the physician as well. So also, if you're a fire-based, you need to be asking those questions and be able to transfer as much information to the transport agency so that they're capable of giving the proper report and a good handoff to the physicians as well. So your report from a non-transport agency to a transport agency should you be the same, assume you're passing it off to the physician at the hospital so that it's all getting passed off correctly. Because that's what happens when we do go in the hospital. They're asking us all the questions, and if you didn't do a good pass off to the transport agency, they're not going to be able to pass off the best information to the hospital. So big thing is obviously too is that that transfer of care. I've actually been on scene and witnessed where a crew actually left. They said, yeah, the patient's upstairs. And so there technically could have been an abandonment situation between there where one crew came on, said, yep, your ambulance is on the way, and they walked out the door and we got no transfer, and it's kind of started over again. So I have seen this happen. So again, you got to make sure you stay with that patient. You cannot abandon that patient unless you've got a release form signed or unless you passed off. So be careful on that, and then documenting that. And we'll talk about releases and that as well. Big thing is also we'll talk about situational awareness. We'll put you through a ton of those different areas of when to go on scene, when not to go on scene, and standing by until you have the right information, especially on site calls, where to position yourself in shooting situations or active situations where the scene is moving. So a lot of different things, and then interacting with the police, which is another, we'll talk about a couple scenarios that's come across where we actually have our 911 system is divided between police and EMS, and those two agencies don't necessarily talk, so you could be going on the same call and there's no talking between that, and that's happened in multiple incidents. So we'll bring up some scenarios with that as well. We're also going to talk about how the communication system works. Whether we're using VHF or whether we're using a new 800 megahertz system, and how that works with repeated towers and what's repeated and what's not when we're dealing with different technology of what's, we'll talk about trunking, we'll talk about all sorts of different things. But based on the areas, some areas we have repeater towers and we need that to get communication and go over there. Some of those are going to be line of sight. There's lots of different things that will come up based on the area that work out. And so we're going to talk about different areas in Spokane and what areas are unrepeated, what areas we need to be on the old VHS channels where it works good and where the 800 megahertz system works really good, and bouncing between those. Working in a city area, the megahertz works fantastic, especially on fire situations there. But when we talk about wildland fire systems, it's the VHF system, and working with those departments that have that, like DNR and other outside agencies. We're going to talk about how we communicate. And there's different type of systems. The simplex transmission, where you can send and just talk, but only one person can be talking at one time. And it's just either voice or it's data transmission. Um, whereas with a duplex, we're actually able to do voice and data and transmit information across that, which is kind of where we are doing a little bit more into the multiplex systems, where we can transmit data, we can transmit voice, and we can talk over each other back and forth in a VHS system. Whereas with the megahertz, 800 megahertz system, it actually stops. Only one person can be talking, so you're not walking over each other. And that's kind of our trunk system, where it pools the frequency and it opens up of what extra channel. And we'll get into more of this when we talk into systems, but our trunk systems basically works within a range, and it opens up a frequency that's next available. It'll automatically, through a computer, reroute you. The hard part with this, is we've experienced a couple times, is when that computer goes down, we lose everything on that channel, and it's not very useful, and have to be able to have a backup system like the BHF to be able to talk. The nice part about it is it works fast. It automatically picks the best frequency, the best channel to get the clearest communication across. And it has been fantastic in that route. As with any technology, though, we do based on how well it works, and have to really rely on that computer to maintain everything. If that computer goes down, our communications go down. Also hooking these up with our data units, are basically computers out there to get that communication over there, using GPS with those, identifying the location, routing us, whole different things that it can be doing. And it works out really well. The cellular aspect, for myself, if I work up at District 4, I use that quite a bit for routing myself around and talking in areas. But same thing, I get in remote areas, I've got minimal radio communication, I've got no cell service up there too. So it's knowing how to communicate and how to talk in those spots. I know City Fire did not allow cell phones. I don't know if they continue not to. We'll talk about this in class. But I think a cell phone is very useful to have. One, to be able to get and talk for poisonings and that, to get other information. Also communicating with the hospitals to let them know. And then lastly, it's fantastic to take pictures. Now, I know it's limited on what we can take, but again, getting pictures of just the scene without having HIPAA violations with that you can portray to the doctors and receiving hospitals is going to be huge, of explaining, okay, this is the wreck, this was what was on him, this is what they came out with. A picture's, fantastic. You can take a video of this lot. Again, you can actually relay to that doc of, hey, here's how serious this area was, even if the patient is not showing some of those things. This right here, you guys should be well versed with, that I don't need to go over. And again, this kind of goes into where I was talking about, where I think cell phones are a huge part of adding to your system. Being able to talk over the radio, but having that cell phone is another part that has been vital, at least in my experiences out there as well. This is something we really didn't go over before, but again, having that ability to have electronic basis of going through. For those of you who work with AMR, it's actually really nice. At least with Deaconess, we were able to transmit 12 leads immediately over to them, and 3 leads to the docs as well. So there's a lot more communication aspects that are improving with technology that we'll be able to get over, and hopefully we'll have that more response. Again, I don't know if you're able to send and receive to Sacred Heart at this point or not. You guys may be able to. I'm just not aware of that, as I don't work for AMR anymore. But those are different things that are out there. So a lot of aspects of growing technology that's making things better for us and transmitting. Pretty soon we will be able to transmit video, audio, over to the hospitals, of showing some information, especially with our long transport times that we may potentially have, that again just relays that system over, so the receiving units know exactly what to do, especially when you're out in rural areas. It's kind of nice to be able to get a hold of that doc ahead of time because of long transport times that are out there. But the downside is as you get into more rural areas, you don't have that communication technology out there, and you've got not as many towers and not able to transmit. The other thing is we get into rural areas too, we have less ALS, and so they've got to deal with a lot more in the BLS system and wait until they can get rendezvoused with a ALS transport agency, whether that be ground transport or be air transport. Sorry. So big thing here is, again, doing ways to follow up, and we're going to talk more about community medicine later, but this will hopefully reduce our amount of transports that are out there because we can do more preventative care, talking with the patients, do follow-up after discharge, make sure patients are taking their medications, they know when to call, when to set up follow-ups with their family physician service, and it's going to save a lot of time and effort once this really comes into play, and it's finding the right way to do that. I know there's been talk about community paramedicine of where the paramedics are actually coming out and capable of writing prescriptions, removing sutures, placing sutures as need be, and doing some things there. I think we're a long ways away from that, but that's kind of the process. And we'll have Mike Lopez, I believe, coming in and talking to you more about where the community paramedicine is planning and where it's going. But as new technology comes off and comes around, we're able to do a lot more things, and we'll talk more about that. There are some people right now who are doing speech-to-text translation, and it works fantastic where they're able to do this en route. I really like this. When I was a physician, I had everything dictated, and it made it so much nicer to have that out there because I'm not a slow, I am a slow typer. So things like that you can use to make your life easier is going to be huge. And then there's some areas where you're able to get receipt of everything, your patient records, everything from there, and get aspect imported, especially into your PCRs, but have access to that. There's a lot more things that are coming up, and we'll see what happens in the future as far as keeping medical records and databases and scanning things in to basically get that information very quickly and have a patient's drug list right there, easy access, instead of having to go search bathrooms and finding pills and figure out what it is. Again, this is kind of getting out there, but there's a lot of different things out there, especially with the Da Vinci robots and things like that we're not going to be applying to our areas, but depending on where you work, there's a lot of things, especially with the military, where they have that, where a physician in the States can actually be working remotely and do surgeries in Afghanistan and other places. So a lot of fantastic technology that's coming out there. It doesn't really apply to us, but depending on what you're going to be doing, we don't know where you're going to be working there. So again, a lot of information that's going to be building up and things that are going to come up as technology improves of how we communicate. Our step into the 800 megahertz so that we can talk and get more agencies talking together is going to be a huge improvement with us, and only plans to get better as we can actually communicate better with the police department, which I have not really seen at this point in time. But as we get that interagency communication, that's going to make a huge area of taking care of the patients. And then with fire scenes and that, being able to communicate with all different aspects between talking to the helicopters, air support, DNR, other agencies as we work together, that's been the huge push of where we're going. It's all regulated by the FCC, who kind of goes over those and designates a frequency and gets our licensing, how they can use it, and kind of watching over the personnel of who takes care of our radios, who takes care of our system and dispatching all those information. And they're going to be monitoring and checking systems so that we're actually using the appropriate frequencies and using appropriate language and communication as we're doing over those. So as there's more advances, as there's more things, it's just going to make our life easier, and it's going to be actually much better for the patient, and communicating that information over to the physicians, to where we get transmit. And I kind of have to laugh when we talk about transmission systems. If you watch the old emergency shows, they actually were able to transmit, again, it was television, but they'd transmit the 4 leads /3 leads over to the hospital very easily through communication, and we're going to be able to get to those bases where you can be talking to a physician and be deciding what you need to be able to do, and again, be able to be better patient care. So that's kind of it where we are today. We'll go over a lot of these scenarios and talk a little bit more in class and go over some more information then. All right. Thanks, guys.